Tales from After the World Went Dark. Book 1. The Preacher and His Flock. Jason's chest tightened and throbbed, sending sharp dagger-like pain through his upper body as he forced himself to keep running. His Converse slapped hard against black concrete, and he felt as if he might throw up. The fire raging in his belly kept him going, though. He ran down an abandoned stretch of road with bright, healthy green vines curling around the metal barrier that separated the pavement from the deep, lush Pennsylvania woods. He'd been running for nearly a mile now, praying for a chance to give his legs a break. He wanted to collapse, but those things behind him just never got tired. They never got winded or exhausted, so he kept going. He had to, or else he'd be dead within minutes. His inner thighs cramped something awful, and his heart was beating hard and audibly. He had to stop. Just for a few seconds, he had to stop. The 19-year-old boy was far from an athlete. He wasn't overweight or even chubby. In fact, he could have been a track star if he put his mind to it. Instead, he spent a lot of his free time with either booze, weed, or fucking cigs, as he usually called them. He hated the fact that he smoked cigarettes. Whenever he bought a fresh pack, a small part of him silently cursed the day he took up the bad habit when Donnie Morris handed him that thin, white son of a bitch behind the high school that one time. On a number of occasions, he gave quitting an honest try, but always ended up tossing his fake ID on the cashier's counter at the 7-Eleven before lighting up in his car. The kid had an addictive personality, and now he was paying for it. He bent over, resting his hands on his knees, while pale orange vomit shot out of his mouth. He desperately sucked in oxygen between purging. Everything hurt. His shoulders ached from the straps of his backpack digging into his tender flesh. His chest felt as if someone stomped on it a few times with cleats, and the muscles in his legs were all locked up. He knew he couldn't stop moving for too long. Those things, those sick abominations were still coming. When they all bunched up together in a mob or herd or whatever you called them, they made a haunting noise that drifted eerily through the humid summer air and reminded him they weren't far off at all. The moans always gave him an uneasy chill. It sounded like some kind of offbeat, chaotic orchestra from hell. If someone or something got their attention, those things would cry out as if in frustrated agony. It was like being one of them was like being trapped in some grisly nightmare they couldn't wake up from without someone coming along and doing them a kindness by blowing their rotten brains out. Jason had no intention of being devoured by the mob, much less getting bitten and becoming one of them. He wiped his mouth with his bare arm. He was sleeveless due to the summer heat. With his last reserves of energy, he pushed himself forward. His body and mind were not communicating well with each other. His body kept going, pushing itself to the limit and then further still, while his mind was screaming, "We can't keep running, asshole!" He managed to make it a few feet further until his mind finally won the battle, and he collapsed on the ground. His handsome young face smacked hard against the unforgiving road. Although he was on the brink of losing consciousness, his head shot back up. The heat from the black pavement jolted him back into reality. He turned his head around, and in the hazy, shimmering distance he saw them coming, like a mirage that was all too real. He could hear them now. He heard their tormented moans and could almost make out a couple of their raw, decaying faces. Each one wore a hideous expression, each one snarling, jaws snapping, and with arms outstretched, they slowly but steadily made their way towards the collapsed fresh meat. The stern grip of dread tightened around his neck like a hangman's noose. With his palms pushing against the hot road, he lifted himself to his knees and spun his head forwards again. That's when he saw it. A bright red van, sitting just around a dipping curvature in the road. It was all scratched up, as if someone dragged a pair of keys across the side and then hurled a fistful of pennies at the back of it, nicking up the paint job. The vehicle was left abandoned on the side of the road, and it was pushed up against the metal barrier, like its driver tried to break through into the woods but gave up midway through. The green vines crept up the left side of it, as if Mother Nature were sending out thick, leafy tentacles to drag the thing into the heart of the forest to be swallowed up by the earth. Almost on instinct alone, he sprung back to his feet and sprinted for the vehicle, completely forgetting that just a moment ago he was telling his body that he had no energy left in it. But the fear of death is a motherfucker. and in that moment Jason Reese knew he had never run faster in his life. Grabbing the door handle, he tugged on it desperately until he managed to pry it open and leapt inside, climbing over a child seat towards the back of the car. He landed in the trunk space of the van, lying flat on his back. He placed his backpack on his chest. For what seemed like a half hour he just lay there, in silence, as his ragged, torn backpack rose up and down with the rhythm of his aching chest. Sweat dripped from his brow and into his eyes, the salt stinging them a bit, but he dared not move a muscle. He could hear now a dozen of those things dragging their feet as they moved past his big red shelter. Occasionally a couple would bump into it, and some pressed their rotting faces against the back window, trying to find something warm and living they could sink their chipped, jagged teeth into. One zombie peered in, eyeing the interior. Its tiny, shrunken pupils darted back and forth frantically, but it found nothing. Jason hid himself just out of the ghoul's sight. He held his breath until the former man pulled its head away from the window. It left a bloody smear on it and continued shuffling down the road with the rest of the mob, their collective moans trailing off into the distance. Jason had done it. He was finally safe.